Today's speaker is Jan Dash, and he is Jan W. Dash if you want to Google him or distinguish him from other people named Jan Dash. So Jan started his professional life very humbly with a PhD in theoretical physics from UC Berkeley. His physics career culminated as the director of research at the Centre de Physique Théorique in Marseille, France. And he published over 60 scientific papers during his physics career. Then Jan switched gears and had a 30-year career as a leader in quantitative management, quantitative finance and risk management, with positions as head of quantitative analytics at Bloomberg, as well as a director at Salomon Smith Barney and other prestigious positions within the finance industry relating to risk management. Most relevant to us today is his second abrupt turn, where he has now focused almost exclusively on climate change issues. Jan is the editor of the Encyclopedia of Climate Change. He also has a book chapter on climate change risk management. He also did the math behind Bloomberg's carbon clock, and you can go and see that online. And has written a number of popular articles about climate change and what we can do about it, including a lot of nice bon mots, like little one-liner refutations of climate deniers. And you can see that at Skeptical Science. Found that quite good. So, and then just to show how well-rounded Jan is, he was chorus master and backstage conductor in the New York Grand Opera under conductor La Selva, and he wrote a piece called the VR Think Method, which is a practical method for instrumentalists. I guess this is I didn't tell him about this so much, but he studied clarinet and piano and has put out this material to help other students in music. So sorry for that little awkwardness at the end there, but I'm very happy to welcome Jan, and I'm going to see if I can. I think I left you all unmuted. Feel free to unmute and clap or say hello, and then we'll let Jan start. Anyway.
Well,
it's always difficult to orchestrate a round of applause on Zoom.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks so much, Eric. It's great to be back speaking to you. I gave a talk before the pandemic.
Oh, sorry.
There, can you hear me now?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Jan. I was everyone, and I couldn't. I had to do everyone, and then you're going to have to, as co-host, unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, I'll back up. I'll go back to. So thanks very much, Eric. It's great to be back speaking at the Red Bank Humanist Society. I guess I gave a talk here about 5 years ago. I can't really remember.
Yeah. And
on climate change, and it's something that I've been now working on for over 15 years. And so what I'd like to do is to share my screen. Okay, just give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Can everybody see that?
I can see it.
Okay, fine. Okay, so what I'd like to do is give a presentation, and it's really an update on the talk I gave to you some time ago about climate change risk management and risk and opportunity, which is the way I like to speak about climate change and what we can do about it. So let's see here. Okay, so just to start off, maybe a little bit unusual, but I'd like to present a poll, and I've pasted the poll in the chat. So I think you can look in the chat if you kind of forget what the questions are. So the first 4 questions are exactly the questions that Eric sent everybody. What is the state of climate action now? What is the new US administration doing on climate? Why are optimism, courage, and persistence important? And how can we help? So I'm not going to collect results or anything like that. This is really just for you. And what I'm going to do is to we'll do the poll at the end of the talk, and just for yourself, see if anything changed. That's really all it is. So these are provocative questions. And then I added a question to the 4 questions that were on the official list that Eric sent out. Is what is your vision for the world in 2050? So 2050 is kind of an intermediate stage. From here to 2100, people talk about 2050. So what's your vision? What would you like to see? Okay, so that's the poll. So the idea is just think about this as we go through the talk. And so as Eric mentioned, just,
Jen, sorry to interrupt you, but people who joined not at the very, very beginning don't have the poll in the chat at the very top. So if you want to try and reinsert that, I was trying to do that, but
okay, let me see if I can do that. My technical ability is I'm not sure it's greater than 0 or not, but I can try. Let's see now.
I wasn't able to just cut.
I might have to stop sharing and then go back to the share. Okay, let me just do that. Okay, chat. Okay, type message here. All right, there we go.
Yeah, there it is. I see it.
Okay, fine.
Thanks.
Okay, so now I'll go back to the presentation. All right, fine. Okay, so just be thinking about that. And also when you have questions, as we go through, just, type your questions in the chat and help you formulate the questions a little bit by having to write them down. I find that's a successful way to ask questions. Okay, so so the bottom line, just to start with the summary, is the climate action is urgent. It really is. And we're now going through a pandemic. That's why we're speaking on Zoom for the nth time for everybody. So there is a pandemic of COVID-19, and ultimately, in one way or another, COVID-19 will be controlled. So I'm not going to go into that. There are lessons that COVID-19 has for climate change, and if you want to ask me some questions, I can talk about that too. But the climate action is urgent. It's been urgent all through the pandemic. It's been urgent for a long time, and we have to put it really on the red button urgent list. So the vision that at least I have, and I know many other people do too, is to leave a livable and just world for our descendants. And that's actually why I'm here, for my grandchildren, right? And so that's a state that we'd like to get to. And a mission, what do we have to do to get to that vision is basically to eliminate carbon emissions. Okay, so it's a complicated story, but that's the one-liner. What do we have to do with all deliberate haste to eliminate carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels, which is causing most of the problem. So the way I like to speak about the problem is in terms of climate risk management. So speaking in this way, you kind of lower the intensity of the discussion in terms of disputes and so forth. We manage risks all the time. Climate change is a real risk. We can manage that risk too, and we really can. So climate risk management. And one thing that is not emphasized as much as it should be emphasized is that there are huge opportunities in the process of doing this risk management of eliminating carbon emissions to leave a livable and just world. There really are. They're huge opportunities, and we can take advantage of them. We should take advantage of them, and some will take advantage of these opportunities. So you know, the idea that there are these opportunities in this transition to a renewable economy and stopping climate change from being such a bad thing is really there. So we, you know, I like to emphasize that. Here are my 3 words: optimism, courage, persistence. So at the end, I'll talk about why I think they're important. Meanwhile, maybe you could think why you think, you know, maybe they're important in climate change action. Okay, so now, here we go. Okay, so what's unchanged is that global warming, which is the upward trend in global temperature in climate change, is the most severe long-term survival and justice issue that we have. That's my take on it. I am a physicist, as Eric mentioned, and I'll just say one thing about science. The science is clear. And experts who know about the science agree. Let me say that again. The science is clear, and experts who know about the science agree that there is global warming and humans are causing it. This is a survival issue. We are seeing impacts now. They have come out of the noise. The warning is that unless we up our action, that these impacts will get much worse. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the impacts. And we don't have much time to do this. So there are many reports out that talk about this, and the urgency is that we have to act more as soon as possible. Now, we are doing a lot, and so I don't want to say that we're not doing anything. We are doing a lot, but we just have to ramp up our action. Okay, so this is a justice issue and an ethics issue. It's a justice issue because those who cause the problem the least, or the least responsible for the problem, are the ones who are going to suffer the most. And it's an ethics issue because there's something called intergenerational equity. That's what I just described. That's our descendants, who did nothing at all, of course, to cause this problem. But less people think that it's just the poor people and you know, our descendants that have to worry about climate change. That's incorrect. There actually will be no place to hide for anyone going forward. Everyone will be impacted by climate change. So here's a pictorial way that I like to talk about the problem. So the problem is that carbon dioxide, CO2, is emitted from burning fossil fuels. And the weight of the carbon dioxide emitted each year by each person on the average across the globe is 1 elephant. So that gives a scale to the problem. You can't see it, but that's what it weighs. Okay, so what? Well, the so what is that there's a bad future temperature rise out of historical bounds if we do not act robustly, and that will lead to disaster. So can you see my cursor? Okay, I hope you can see it. So what I've plotted here is a graph. I'm not going to show a whole lot of data, but I wanted to show this. This is the temperature, and with, so you know, a little uncertainty, but not much, over the last 1,000 years. And there are more recent graphs that extend this, you know, picture back 10,000 years since the start of civilization, or since the end of the last ice age and the start of civilization. And this is what we can expect in the future if we don't act robustly for climate change. So you can see it's way out of any experience that the human race has had since the start of civilization. And it's moving out of that band right now. Okay, well, still, so what? Well, the problem is that, as I said at the beginning, that we can expect huge impacts, much greater than anything we're seeing now, if that continues. So in order to study this, in order to talk about it, we run what are called scenarios. And by convention, more than anything else, these scenarios are run from now until 2100. Now, 2100 is not that far into the future. If you think about it for a minute, and you think about going to see a Shakespeare play, Shakespeare lived 400 years ago. This is 80 years into the future, not 400 years. So it's not very far into the future, actually. There is a Paris Agreement that we can talk about if you want. And the agreement agreed to by all countries is to try to limit the increase in global temperature on the average to 2 degrees centigrade or less, or even 1.5 degrees. And right now, if all countries satisfy what they said they were going to do for the Paris Agreement, we are headed for 3.5 degrees centigrade. Or I should say that a 1 degree centigrade rise is equivalent to 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit that we usually talk about. So, and that's a disaster for our descendants. I wouldn't want to live on that planet. So we have to do better. We have to increase our ambition. The Paris Agreement is a good start, but it's not enough. So I like to show this letter, which is something that we picked up at the Paris Climate Conference. It's a letter written by a child to then President Obama, asking him to do something about climate change. And this is why we're here. There are other reasons too, but that's at least why I'm here. So I've mentioned that climate change is a human survival issue. So what does that mean? Well, we've always had disasters. The disasters, on the whole, are made worse due to climate change. So that's the problem. So here's a list of them. Each one of these could take an hour to describe completely, so I can't do that. But I do just want to run through the list. And now you've seen these, many of you have seen some of these or all of them before. Just to set the stage, I just want to run through the list. So the first is increased conflict due to climate change impacts. That means more wars, national insecurity, and more terrorism. Worse water shortages for large numbers of people, hundreds of millions. More crop failures and more hunger as climate change impacts crops. More intense fires that we're seeing, for example, in California or Australia. More droughts that we now see in the Southwest and other places in the world. More flooding for high precipitation events, kind of the inverse of more droughts in other parts of the world. Severe species extermination effects of climate change, in addition to everything else that's going on for species. More disease and potential increases in pandemics. Worse extreme weather, worse large hurricanes. More political instability and the loss of civil rights, which is kind of an indirect thing that happens because of impacts on in various ways, and I can talk about that if you want. More severe heat waves, more climate migration. If you think that we have a problem with migration from Central America now, the future is worse. And something that I don't think gets enough attention, severe economic and financial disruption, which many more people are talking about now than in the past, and possible breakdown of the whole system. And some of these interact with each other. So this one thing can have impacts on another. And moreover, there are potential tipping points of no return. So it may be not possible to fix some of these things if we don't act more. But the good news is we can actually mitigate climate change. We really can. And we can do it with the tools that we've got now. And as I mentioned, the way that I prefer to talk about this action is using climate change risk management. So we have to change with all deliberate speed from fossil fuels to renewables to the extent that it's possible. And we need action at all levels, local to global. So individual action, yes, individual action makes a difference, but it's not enough. We need action from NGOs. For example, we're here as an NGO, the Red Bank Humanist Society, right? Faith-based organizations. Businesses, extremely important, hugely important. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Action by governments at the municipal level, by cities. More than half the people in the world live in cities now, so control over emissions at a municipal level is extremely important. By states, national programs, and international agreements. And in climate action, I like to use the word and, not the word or. So there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that we can use to completely solve the climate problem and make climate change less severe. And instead, there are many actions. In fact, there are 100 of them. And they are, as you already know, and I'll just summarize them here, but I'll go into more detail later, renewable energies. We need to ramp up renewable energies. We need to ramp up the electrification of the transport sector, electric vehicles. We need better efficiency in industry. And we need better efficiency in the entire range of activities that we deal with, from homes to businesses to land use and so forth. Diet is extremely important. It's not the only thing, but it is important. Land use, extremely important. And something called the circular economy, which is reducing the amount of stuff that we actually throw into the waste pile and reuse it, right? That's the circular part. So again, I want to say that, look, all of these actions are substantial now, and they're getting more every day. We just need more, and we need to ramp up the pace much more. So one of the things that will really help is a price on carbon. So I can, answer questions about this if you want to pose some questions. That actually stimulates all of these climate actions for a variety of reasons. And the one that I like the best is the Citizens Climate Lobby proposal of a fee and dividend, where you put a fee on carbon at the source, and the money that's collected is returned to households. So it's not really a tax. In any case, the price on carbon is something that is really important. So I just want to stress that up front. So there are two types of action. One type of action is mitigation. So that's just to reduce climate change itself and reduce the amount of global warming. And for what we can't mitigate, we're going to have to adapt to the changes in climate and increase the resilience or our ability to adapt, right? So these are also actions that we need to engage in. Okay, so what can we achieve? Well, here's a list. We can reduce worsening extreme weather. Extreme weather is getting worse. We can reduce that worsening of extreme weather. We can reduce suffering. So here are two pictures during Sandy and Katrina, and so we can reduce suffering. We can reduce sea level rise. The US Navy runs scenarios for sea level rise by 2100 of 1 to 2 meters, 3 to 6 feet, as might be less, but it might be more too. So we can reduce the sea level rise with really bad consequences for people living in by the coast, which is which is a large, many hundreds of millions of people. Reduce negative climate health impacts. So climate change has been called the worst public health crisis that we've ever had to face. This is a graph that you cannot read, but let me tell you what it is, and you'll see it doesn't matter that you can't read it. So here across we have various types of things that happen from climate change, and going down we have various diseases. The only thing to notice is that this matrix is full of check marks. So climate change in its various aspects affects all kinds of health issues. The Defense Department has been talking for many years in quadrennial reviews about security risks to the United States in particular, where they call climate a risk multiplier. Here's a graph of water shortages in the United States. Right now, the Southwest is undergoing an extreme water shortage, and it's probably going to get worse. Snowpacks are melting and so forth at high rates. Increasingly damaged crops by high temperatures that will increasingly occur if we do not mitigate climate change. Reduced intensified fires, attribution of increased intensity of fires to climate change is established, way out of statistical bounds. And reducing financial and economic crisis risk, which doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So what we need to do is manage the transition risk to renewable energies, and also need to manage the climate physical risks that I've been talking about. And the main point, which I don't think gets enough attention either, is that the whole system, the whole financial economic system worldwide is unstable. Things can make it break down. And we've seen some things happen already. It could get worse. So there's a World Economic Forum at a place called Davos, very picturesque place in Switzerland, I like to mention, for years now. And it's where the top finance and economics people in the world go to talk about problems, worldwide problems. They talk about all kinds of problems. Climate is at the top and has been for some time. So here are the top 10 risks by likelihood and impact over the next 10 years. For likelihood, the top risk for likelihood is extreme weather. Extreme weather is made worse by climate change. And climate action failure as a likelihood. So this is a very pessimistic view. Hope it doesn't happen, but that's a top risk that's listed. For impacts, climate action failure is listed at the top. It's the very top risk, and weapons of mass destruction is next. I do want to mention that action on climate change is connected with all social justice issues that with which people are concerned. I certainly am concerned with them. These Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are a collection of 17 goals with targets and metrics to describe them that were agreed to by all countries, including the United States in 2015. You can see them here. I'll just read one of them. Goal number 1 is no poverty. That means elimination of poverty worldwide. That's the goal. And you can read the others. I want to point out that climate action, number 13, is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. That means if you want to have action to reduce poverty, you need to be concerned about climate change. And people that talk about this say that if there is no resolution of the climate problem, you can't actually eliminate poverty. So the success of the Sustainable Development Goals, the success of the resolution of social justice issues has to be accompanied by robust action on climate. I do want to mention a project Drawdown, which is, there's a book. If you don't already know about it, I suggest you get the book, or they have a website you can look at. It's a comprehensive list of 100 climate actions that are available now with models to evaluate the action. So they have numerical models. And they can calculate the dollar benefits from acting on various things to alleviate climate change. And they can calculate the costs. And the benefits far outweigh the costs in dollar terms by trillions of dollars. So if you're talking to somebody that says, well, it's just going to cost too much, just refer them to the project drawdown where the benefits outweigh the costs. I do want to mention a utility that I would recommend that everybody have a look at. It's called En-ROADS. It's an acronym. It's developed by MIT and in collaboration with some other people. And it's a simulator. So let me just describe briefly what it is. Down at the bottom, you can see all kinds of actions on climate, renewable energies, energy efficiency, deforestation, or reforestation, and so forth. So you can put in your own scenario just by moving these sliders around. And then you can see over here that the copy is a little cut off here, but you can see what the ultimate result is of doing these actions. Behind this is a huge model, which is in agreement with the academic models, on the average, integrated assessment models, climate models, and so forth. And so you can see that if you actually get this simulator, and you can download it for nothing and run it yourself, very easy, that you need a portfolio of actions. You have to do a lot of these things in order to get to a reasonable result. No one thing works, and you will find out that a price on carbon is really necessary in order to get to a result that you want. For example, 1.5 degrees. You have to put a price on carbon. Almost impossible otherwise. Okay, well, for the international climate negotiations, the United States is back. The next conference is in Glasgow at the end of this year, COP26 it's called. And I just want to say a few words about international climate action. So the future of international climate action, the US is back. China is huge. It's a whole discussion of various countries and what they're doing and what they promise to do and what they can do and what they should do. And the European Union have made commitments to go carbon neutral by certain dates. So these are intentions, and that's good. India is a separate issue and has to be considered in light of how much fossil fuels they actually use, and an energy equity issue, which is, we're sitting here comfortably in ourselves, and why shouldn't villages in India have the same energy, use? And so what I do want to say is that there has been steady, slow progress for most countries. Well, it has, and it's been steady and it's been slow, and it needs to get faster, but it's there. And the recognition is that climate is everybody's problem. So the analogy I like to use is like everybody's on a boat. The boat is sinking, and we have to bail the boat out. There's a hole in the bottom, right? And so that means everybody has to work at doing this. Now, everybody's got buckets of different sizes, but what we can't have is free riding, where one country says, as was the case in the United States for the last 4 years before change of administration, it's not my problem, you guys fix it. That's just unethical. There is some obstruction and there is some backsliding, so to be honest, and we can talk about that. There's a critical problem here, everybody. It's called the carbon budget. Carbon budget. How much carbon can we put in the atmosphere before the planet gets unlivable? This is not a question of politics. This is a question of physics. And the carbon budget is set by physics. So, and we've used up a large fraction of the carbon budget already. And the question is, how much more carbon can we put up into the atmosphere, and who gets to do it? So this is the question of international negotiations, and physics says the emissions of all countries have to decrease by 2050 if we're going to get to 2 degrees as a limit of the increase in temperature over prehistorical limits by 2100. So this is a graph that is relevant. So this includes not only the United States and the European Union, it also includes China, it includes India, it includes all other countries. So this is not what's fair, it's what's possible from physics. Okay, so now I thought I would talk about national action. And so there is a Biden administration climate action. It's really aggressive, it's great. There should be, you know, it's going to be difficult to pass it, but we'll see what happens. We expect a detailed plan. Actually, on Earth Day, they're supposed to release a detailed plan. He's already issued an executive order, President Biden. We are back in the Paris Agreement. And so as a proxy for what I'm pretty sure he's going to say, we can use bills that have already come out in Congress, right? So this is a bill by Frank Pallone's committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, called HR 1512, which is a bill. The House of Representatives called the Clean Future Act. So I'm pretty sure that, you know, the bill that ultimately will get presented will be something like this. This is similar to what the Democratic, you know, platform had and to other, you know, documents in the past. So let's go through it real briefly. There are various sections called titles. So the first one is that there is a national climate target, net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 from the United States. Extremely ambitious. We have to do it. And 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. That's only 9 years, everybody. So that's a national climate target. It's really good to have these targets so that we know where we have to go. In the power sector, the goal is to have 100% clean electricity generation by 2035. And that's very complicated, and it is involved all kinds of moves to renewable energies and the grid and so forth. Efficiency, extremely important. There's lots that we can do. There are targets that have been set up, standards. There are grants and there are rebates, a number of detailed proposals for efficiency. Transportation, electric vehicle charging. We need a network of electrical vehicle charging in order to expand the use of electric vehicles in the United States, both at the consumer level and at the business level. And in addition, there are some financing provisions. Industry, a difficult sector, but we have to start taking action. There are some projects. There's something called the Climate Star Project. So industry efficiency, industry switch to renewable energies, some of which may need advanced types of renewables, and we can talk about that also. Environmental justice is extremely important. There are all kinds of grants. There are cleanup provisions, finally cleaning up the Superfund sites and so forth. And there are also training provisions in here. Super pollutants. There are proposals for methane cuts, black carbon in the bill. And there are economy-wide policies and a variety of them. And I just want to highlight one of them, which I think is the most important one. That is that the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to require publicly traded companies to disclose their strategies to identify and mitigate their climate risks. Let me read that again. The SEC is going to require companies to disclose their strategies, company strategies, to identify and mitigate climate risk. So why is this important? It's important because businesses are going to be involved intimately in solving the climate problem. And a lot of them have woken up, some have not, but in any case, it's time to bite the bullet. They have to, first of all, figure out what their climate risk is. That's a big problem. And then they have to start mitigating their climate risk. What is their strategy for doing this? So this is a huge, this is maybe one of those important sections of the whole bill. Okay. Waste reduction, extremely important. Increases in recycling, the plastics, and there are grants for doing this. And worker and community transition, for a just transition, for example, is presented in COP24, and there are financial assistance to local government. So that's what's in the Pallone bill. I expect that what will be ultimately, hopefully passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate, signed into law by President Biden, will be something like this. I also want to mention the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, resubmitted by Ted Deutsch, which is called HR 2307. He just did it in the last Congress. It was called HR 763. And it's what I mentioned. It follows the Citizens Climate Lobby proposal. Dividends are collected from a carbon as a fee at the source of extraction of the carbon. So oil wells, natural gas extraction, and coal mines, or choke points where these products are processed. And all of the fees are distributed back to American families. So this is, by itself, models show that this reduces carbon emissions by 40% in 12 years and 90% by 2050. So it goes a long way and will stimulate all of the other things that we've talked about, as I described before with the En-ROAD simulator. It also prevents many thousands of pollution-related US deaths, which is of course interest to everybody, and especially the environmental justice communities. And it generates jobs. So action on climate generates jobs. We said that again. Action on climate can generate jobs. So it's not a job killer. It's not an economic bad thing. It's a good thing. Have to talk about We Are Still In, which was created after Trump took us out of the Paris Accord. Actions and commitments by businesses, cities, colleges and universities and cultural institutions to reduce their emissions. That's still there. There's state level climate action. For example, here's New Jersey's Global Warming Response Act 80 by 50 report. I suggest you have a look at it. It's very ambitious. This is state level climate action. I mentioned city level climate action is extremely important. So there's something called the Global Covenant for Mayors. There's something called ICLEI. And so there are many plans by cities which are ambitious. Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, many cities are developing plans, and we should have more of them. Business is starting to wake up. The large corporations are now saying that they will go carbon neutral. Here's a statement by Apple to be 100% carbon neutral for not only for themselves, but their supply chain also, something called Scope 3 indirect emissions by 2030. Very ambitious. Okay, so let me talk about business for a minute. So business is key, and there's huge opportunity here. So we need trillions of dollars to institute a renewable economy. Many trillions, not just a few. Private capital has that scale. Governments don't have that kind of scale. So the fact that we need all that money for investment, capital investment, means that businesses have to be involved, whether you like it or not. If we're going to solve the problem of climate change, businesses must be a central component. One statement that people make all the time is the renewable economy is now unstoppable. So that's just the case. So at a high level, what we need is government to set friendly policy, which is what the Biden administration is doing, and put in some dollars, which is what the Biden administration is going to hopefully do. And then business is going to have to do the heavy lifting. And they're starting to wake up. They have to wake up more. The SEC provision that's proposed in Title 8 of the Pallone plan will help do that. And there's a huge opportunity here. And it's more, I believe, than in the transition from, so when I was a student, I used to take cards up to the mainframe, right? I have gray hair, so many people are too young to know about mainframes or cards, but that's true. And this thing that I carry in my pocket has more power than the mainframe that I used to carry the cards up to. And there's huge opportunities that were generated, internet and distributed computing. I believe that distributed energy is going to have the same effect. And it means jobs. It really does. Lots and lots and lots of jobs. So there are jobs in particular in climate risk management. So let me talk about that. And I believe that climate risk management is the future of risk management for Main Street, Wall Street, governments, and academia. So let me just say something about a project that I've been working on for about a year, which I call the Climate Change Academy of Risk and Opportunity, or Climate CARO, which is trying to promote a new profession of a climate change risk and opportunity officer reporting into the C-suites of businesses, so at the same level as enterprise risk management now, to help businesses understand what the risks are and help mitigate it, and to help guide business planning and decision-making and take advantage of opportunities. And so I am engaged in a process of trying to persuade universities to start programs which would have competencies in 3 areas. One is risk management. So this is standard risk management. They have these competencies now. Climate change basics. There are programs now in climate change basics. And then a whole host of specialized topics that I've listed here that you can't read, but if you ask me questions, I'll talk about it. So, but to have a master's degree where all of these things are put together in an integrated program. So a master's degree would be given in climate change risk management by university, and it would cover all this stuff, not just risk management, not just climate change, and not just specialized topics, but all of it. And I believe that this is going to be the job description that businesses are going to be asking for soon. There's all kinds of NGO action. Here's the Sierra Club that's very, very active. Communities are ready. Ready for 100, it's called. There's been all kinds of action, closing out coal mines by the Sierra Club, working with financed by Mayor Bloomberg, which has been very effective. Okay, so how specifically can we help? Well, you can talk about climate change. That's maybe the most important thing, is talk about it, bring it up, right? Write letters to the editor. And at a high level, talk or call or write to anyone with leverage in government or business. So individual action is important, but this is more important. So, and then join groups and show up, right? And here's some more suggestions. So I'm just kind of talk about this a little bit. So join the Citizens Climate Lobby. So there, I've already talked about them. Nonpartisan group advocating for a fee and dividend approach. And you can contribute to the Citizens Climate Education, which is tax deductible, that Eric mentioned at the beginning, and the link is on your flyer. So that would be highly, very, very much appreciated. In addition to the charity that Eric mentioned at the beginning. You can support solar energy, right? Support all renewables, support policies that promote them at a local and national level. You can participate in demonstrations. Here's a picture of the People's Climate March some time ago. There have been marches also by young people. They happen every so often. Show up. You can promote climate education, extremely important. So there are all kinds of climate education opportunities. There are webinars, many webinars and courses. You can go to conferences. The international conferences are available largely online now. You can go to a lot of them. There are many opportunities. Climate Week is coming up. Earth Day is coming up. And it's important to support climate education for kids. There's lots of resources out from all kinds of sources. I do want to mention the Climate Encyclopedia, which I was the editor for. It's just out. It uses a case study approach, facilitating climate communication to answer the question, what is climate change really? And the focus is on climate change in finance, economics, and policy, but also covers a number of other areas, which I'll mention in a minute. Publisher is World Scientific. That's what it looks like. And here are all of the areas that it covers. You can see that, that it basically covers everything in climate change, one way or another, as a case study written by experts directly to the public and in a format understandable by everybody. You can write a blog. This is a blog I write. You can write a blog, something you can do, right, about climate change. Artists out there, you can put on a play, you can write a song, you can paint a picture, you can take a photograph. Lots of opportunities to reach people in ways that they ordinarily don't get reached, for example. And something that's extremely important that Eric also mentioned is you have to stand up and oppose the climate deniers, both climate risk deniers and climate science deniers. They're there, they were rampant in the last administration, and they're opposing progress. So I just do want to mention that a little bit. So the reason for the denial is just to oppose climate action. That's really it. Federal government in the last administration had, climate science and risk deniers were rampant at all levels. Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was severely damaged, has to be restored. It is unfortunately the classic Republican default attitude now, and there were Republicans that used to act on climate and they just don't do it anymore. Some Republicans are in the climate closet, and I don't know what your political stance is of people in the audience here, but I'm just stating a fact. You can be nonpartisan, but you shouldn't be blind either. There is some climate action push from young Republicans, which is good, but on the whole, unfortunately, there's not much climate urgency. In fact, to give one word to it, it's zero. So hopefully that will change, and I hope it does change, and I work with the Citizens Climate Lobby in a nonpartisan way to try to help make a change, but unfortunately that's the way it is right now. So you can support climate science. This is one of my heroes, Michael Mann, wonderful scientist and an climate activist. You can promote reliable climate sources. Here's one, Real Climate. A little more technical, but they have all kinds of articles which are extremely reliable, especially for climate science. You can promote responsible climate journalism. A resource is the Climate Science Rapid Response Team. You can promote reports. There are all kinds of reports, government reports, business reports. One that I especially like is Risky Business, which you might want to have a look at. There are all kinds of law cases now. You can go to Columbia University, the Sabin Law Center lists all of them. Michael Gerard is the head of that. And there's one by youth called the Juliana Law Case. Here are all of the young people. This man over here is James Hansen, famous scientist who's their advisor. You can support divestment. People have been talking about divestment for a long time now, taking your money out of fossil fuels. It's clear now that there will be stranded assets. We cannot burn everything that's in the ground. It could be a fossil fuel because we'll blow through the carbon budget. Okay, so fossil fuels are now not only ethically the thing to do, but by now it's a bad investment also. The fossil fuel sector has been collapsing for some time. Promote climate justice. Small island nations, for example, did nothing at all to cause climate change, are threatened by climate change. Support business climate action. Here's a Responsible Business Summit, happened a couple of years ago. These are now common. They're investor summits organized by an organization called Cirrus, which has, I don't know how much now, but maybe $20 trillion in real assets of their members. Okay, you can support research. Batteries are really important. Research, all kinds of batteries. We need batteries to store energy to make the electric grid work better. Support wind energy. So each one of these little dots is a wind facility. Offshore wind is now starting off the East Coast, in addition to onshore wind. Support electric vehicles. You can even buy an electric vehicle. You can buy a hybrid vehicle, which you can drive electrically for 30 miles or so on a charge, and charge it overnight. And which is pretty much what people do anyway. Most people don't drive thousands of miles in their car. One of my favorite topics is fusion energy, and you can support that. There's a facility called ITER in France now. Fusion is how the sun works. So you make nuclei, small nuclei come together, it produces energy. If fusion energy really can work, and this ITER facility is a facility that's testing the commercial feasibility, there will be enough energy for the human race for 1 million years. Support energy efficiency. There are all kinds of low-hanging fruit. Reduce energy use per capita. And there's lots more in the climate action portfolio. Like I said, the drawdown list is 100 things. Here's more. Support new energy technology research. Hydrogen carbon sequestration is another one. Eat less meat or grass-fed meat. There's something called geoengineering. We really have to worry about that, especially something called solar radiation management. Support mass transit. Reduce, reuse, and recycle, the circular economy that I mentioned. Support better agricultural practices and reduce plastics. Okay, so climate risk management and opportunity. So you've seen what we can do. So now here are my 3 words. I just want to mention what, how I see it. So optimism. First of all, am I optimistic? People sometimes ask me, Jen, are you optimistic? And here's my response. I don't have a choice. I have to be optimistic. Why? Because when my grandchildren get old enough so that they can ask me, Grandpa, what'd you do about climate change? I'm not going to say, oh, I got depressed and quit. I'm not going to do that. So I don't have a choice. Yes, you have to be optimistic. Courage. It's difficult enough to have a transition to a renewable economy, do all the things that I've been talking about. It's made more difficult by the obstruction that we see. And so you need courage in order to overcome that, right? Courage. And persistence. This is not a sprint. We're not going to solve the problem of climate change in a day, a month, or a year. This is going to be a multi-year effort. We have to start now. We have to ramp up our ambition, but it's a multi-year opportunity and a multi-year task. So optimism, courage, and persistence. And we can all help. So everybody, maybe you're already doing it, pick a climate action and join in. And if you are already active in climate change, then thank you. So that's the end of the talk. Here's the exit poll. So I'll just leave it up. So if it's in the chat also, so just ask yourself, did anything change because of the talk, right? What is the state of climate action now? Do you understand a little bit better? What is the new US administration doing on climate? Why are optimism, courage, and persistence important? How can we help? And what is your vision for the world in 2050? Okay, so that's it. And so I'll stop sharing. And does anybody have any questions?
Okay, so the way we were going to work this, Jen, was to encourage people to put their question in the chat, and then I would put the questions to you, at least for the first 20 minutes of Q&A.
Sounds good.
Well, when we hit the noon hour, which is sort of our formal end, we can then open it up to a somewhat more informal discussion. But I wanted, while we're still within our normal time bounds, to get as many good questions in as I can.
Okay.
So please put your questions in the chat, everybody, and I will read them out. And then I'll unmute everybody later at noon. Okay, so when you can see these questions too, but I think this first one's a good one. Is nuclear energy a necessity to get within those climate targets?
Great question. So this is by itself a 1-hour discussion. Let me try to summarize my take on it. So first of all, it's extremely complicated. So I just want to say that up front. We do have nuclear energy now in the United States. And let me just talk about the United States first. We do have nuclear energy in the United States. Building a new, and they're what are called light water reactors. And building a new light water reactor is in the United States financially, if for no other reason, financially impossible. There was one of them, I think in South Carolina, or I can't remember exactly which which was the last one that was being built, and I don't think it's being built anymore. So just on a financial basis, because of the insurance and so forth, it's not feasible. There are all kinds of problems with nuclear energy, not the least of which is potential proliferation problems, which have never been solved by nuclear waste. Okay, having said that, let me jump internationally, and there is some action on nuclear reactions, nuclear energy that's going on now, especially in China and a couple other places. But China is reducing this program, and so I would say that internationally, there's not a lot of action for nuclear light water reactors. There is now a movement towards something called small modular reactors, which solve some of the problems of safety in the big reactors, but even the small modular reactors have their own problems. There is a fourth generation of nuclear energy that is promoted, especially by James Hampson, and I tend to agree with him, which is not the light water reactors. There's very reduced proliferation problem, and the fourth generation reactors can eat the nuclear waste produced by the present generation of reactors. That's still in the process. It's not going to be available for a while, and it may or may not be commercially viable by the time it gets out of the research phase. Then finally,
can I also just in the broad model that you had, where you had all the sliders, if you either leave nuclear energy where it is, or even if you have it decreasing, can you use other methods to get to the target without nuclear, or is nuclear an essential part of the equation?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Now, there's a question: what do we do about the reactors that are there now? If we take them offline now, then we have to replace the energy by something else, and ultimately you could replace them with wind and solar, maybe some geothermal, maybe some wave energy, and so forth. But right now, if you take them offline, the most likely replacement would be coal, which is really bad. So a lot of people, what they say now is, okay, just let them run out their license and then turn them off. And by that time, renewable energies will have increased to the point where they can take over the nuclear role. I do want to say that fusion energy, which is completely different from fission energy, has none of the problems of fission energy, and which is under research, as I said, at ITER, represents a long-term solution to humanity's problem with energy. So those are some of the considerations.
Okay, so do you want to pick the questions out of the chat yourself, or you want me to read them?
No, why don't you read them?
Okay, sure. Okay, so you had mentioned that you were trying to establish a master's degree curriculum for climate risk managers to advise CEOs across the world. What universities already have good curriculum options? And so if you had a son or daughter and you wanted to point them in this direction, where would you send them?
Thank you. That's another great question. So the best program that I know of that comes the closest to what I'm trying to talk about is Imperial College in London. They have a finance program, and they've teamed up with the Grantham Institute in London, which is a climate full of climate change professionals, and they've created a program, master's degree program, very, very similar to what I'm talking about. The Sloan School at MIT has a good program, not entirely. They don't treat everything, but they have some. I am working with Fordham University in New York to start a program there. Just want to mention that. Other universities all have something. They all have something. Columbia, for example, they have a fabulous, Earth Institute, right? And they do all kinds of climate research, but they're not hooked up with the risk management people. So you have risk management, you have enterprise risk management, and then you have climate change, but they don't talk to each other. So that's kind of a typical problem in universities. Most universities now have sustainability programs, which are good, and they go part way, and they have something called ESG, environmental, social, and governance programs that goes some distance, and some people have tried to shoehorn some climate change into those programs, which is a little artificial, I think. But anyway, so everybody's, you know, got something, and hopefully people will be moving, you know, more in this direction as they see the opportunities, and its business also ramps up their demand. So I should also mention that there are accrediting organizations like ACCO has a certificate, GARP has a certificate. These are kind of, I want to say maybe the best way to do is partial solutions to the problem. The master's degree programs, I think, are a little more comprehensive.
So here's another question that came early on from asking what can be done about dairy farms on golf courses. And I'll broaden that question a little bit more to what is the most sort of feasible solution to better regulate land usage and resource management? Is that a legislative solution? Is that mass action to try, you know, how do you get at that for actors who want to keep their golf courses and their existing agricultural practices?
Okay, so one of the things that I remember about the last talk that I gave at Red Bank Humanists is that people ask me questions I can't answer. So I don't know anything about golf courses, but let me talk a little bit about agriculture and diet in a bit more high level, and maybe that'll help. And I have to say I'm not an expert, so but you know, so so diet is really important. Just the meat, you know, industry altogether, the FAO, the United Nations FAO reports that about 15% of total emissions are due to worldwide are due to eating meat, and it's getting worse because as countries move up to the middle class, they you know, people like meat. They want to eat more meat and less rice, right? So now, on the other hand, there are all kinds of practices that are better practices that will help. There are regenerative agriculture practices. There's there's grass-fed beef. You let the animals run wild and so forth. It's not as many animals can be raised that way, but it's better for the environment. And you can do things like improving the feed of animals to, especially cows. You put seaweed in their feed, which reduces methane emissions, which is another problem. It's not all carbon dioxide. There's also methanes, and there are also trace gases that I should have mentioned at the beginning. So when we talk about carbon dioxide, usually talk about carbon dioxide equivalents. Then there are all kinds of products that are now coming out. You may have seen some in the store. There's something called Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, and there's also other Beyond Chicken, I think, where you're either using plant-based materials or you're using cells from animals grown on a plant matrix, but without the animal. And so the problems of cows are pretty inefficient, actually, and so the hope is that this will be these will be products that will be appetizing enough to people so that they'll eat them, and at the same time alleviate the problems that that cows produce. There are also regenerative agricultural practices that are just better. You can put trees in you know, mix trees in with farming. You can, in fact, the whole subject of planting trees and carbon sequestration by farmers is something that I think the Biden administration has. I think it's in Pallone's bill also. So what you do there is you pay people to grow switchgrass or poplar trees are two popular ones where they grow. You know, you pull carbon out of the atmosphere by these plants or by these trees, and then you can turn them into biochar and bury them. That's another thing that you can do. The Amazon is a huge problem. Bolsonaro's government has not been effective in maintaining the Amazon forests, and there are problems in the stability of the Amazon rainforest, which can turn it into you know, basically step-like you know, area. So that's all that is huge, is hugely important. Put together, however, I should also say that there is some what I would call disinformation out there. So some people believe that if you just solve the problem of eating beef, you solve 50% of the problem. That's not true. It's about 18%, but it's still important, or 15%, but it's still important. It's a big deal. Another question?
Sure. So I'm gonna go back to some of the nuclear physics, since we can benefit from your expertise there. There are a couple of questions. One was about the time frame for the nuclear fusion. I remember throughout my entire life being told that it was about 30 years away. That's sort of the joke in the field. Is that something that now people are looking at and saying, yeah, it's really going to come? Or is it going to be sort of this perpetual future thing?
Okay, so that's a great question. Sure, the joke is that nuclear fusion is only 30 years away, and you can say that at any time. And right. However, things are different now. So what's different? First thing that's different is that we are close. So there's something called break-even. It's something called the Lawson criterion, which involves the density of the material that you have to put in a confined space in order to make the fusion happen in the first place, and the time that takes place in. So that has markedly improved. And there's something called the break-even criteria, where you get more energy out than what you get in, is there now. You need about 10 times as much energy to come out as you put in order to make things commercially viable. And the expectation is that ITER will achieve that. So that'll be there. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that there are now improvements in the magnets that you need in order to make the confinement happen. There's something called high temperature superconductivity, and there are breakthroughs in high temperature superconductivity, recent developments that may really facilitate things. The materials that you put into the high temperature superconductors are a little difficult to work with, so you need to be careful and blah, blah, blah. But there's some progress there. MIT has been a leader in this effort. So that may be helpful. The third thing is that we now have supercomputers that can detect and resolve the problems of instabilities that happens when you get all these particles together. Then they're all positive. The protons that are in the nuclei that you need. So the way this actually works is you have a deuterium, which is a proton and a neutron, interacting with a tritium nucleus. With a tritium nucleus, which is a proton and two neutrons. Put them together, you get a helium nucleus coming out, which is 4 nuclei, and then you get 1 extra neutron, and that produces energy, right? That's the whole idea. Well, the protons all have positive charge, and you know the positive charges repel, like charges repel. So the whole problem is getting enough magnetic fields to make the positive charges all stay together so that this nuclear interaction can take place. And the positive charges are ingeniously ingeniously blow themselves up. I don't mean blow themselves up so there's an explosion, but just dissipate, and so that so they're not close enough so that they can interact. That's what they want to do. So there are all these instabilities, but you can analyze the instabilities now with computers, and you previously weren't able to do that in 1950 when this whole thing was proposed. So the answer is a strong maybe, and hopeful that it will happen. There are also other. There are also several kinds of designs. The ITER is something called a tokamak, which is kind of a figure-8 design, and there are also machines called stellarators that have been resurrected. There's a big one in Germany now. They work better than they used to, and there's also laser fusion, where you take a little pellet of deuterium and tritium and you zap it with lots of high-power laser beams. They're big on that at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in California. So maybe even that would work. So the answer is, I don't know, but let's hope.
Okay, so what we'll do now is I'm going to sort of call the formal end to the forum, but we're going to now do a slightly more conversational session for another 20, 30 minutes with Jan. And so I'm going to unmute everyone and let people talk in a more conversational manner and get some more questions in. But if you do need to leave, then that's okay. And we'll see you next time for our members meeting in May.
And can I just say that I really appreciate people just hanging in there and listening to all this. You know, there's a lot of detail, and there's lots of things that you can do, and hope this has been helpful.
Okay, so what I've actually just done is I didn't actually unmute everybody involuntarily. I've just allowed people to unmute themselves when they're talking. So if you feel moved to speak, you can unmute yourself and insert yourself in the conversation, but when you're done, try and mute yourself again to screen out unwanted background noise.
Dan, this is Joe. I put
Hey,
this
Joe.
in the chat. How are you? Too bad you can't see me. Something's wrong with the camera. You realize, of course, you're preaching to the choir here. My question revolves around that, and that is, how do you reach those, and I know many of them, who believe, and these are good old Americans, that they can do whatever they want, when they want, including ignoring climate change, or just deny it completely. Examples, just some local ones. The proliferation of gas-emitting, polluting devices to maintain pristine lawns. This is the true American way. So this is just one little example. How do you reach these people? Have you developed coalitions with other organizations? What do you suggest? Thank you.
That's a great question.
Question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So do what you can. Talk about it, so climate communication, kind of what I actually think about it is that there's a spectrum of people's attitudes. So if you go to something called the Yale Climate Communication site, they have taken polls of people's attitudes toward climate change, and from people that don't want to do anything and deny that it's happening, to people that are enthusiastic and people I'm talking to now preaching to the choir, and that's changing. So that's an optimistic point. I'm not answering your question yet, but it's changing. It's getting better. More people are more convinced we have to do something about climate change more robustly, and that it's important. And so that's optimistic. Second thing is that we're now in a situation where at a federal level, there is going to be action. So you can publicize this. You say talk about the Clean Future Act. Write a letter to your newspaper. I think the Clean Future Act is fabulous. Something like that, right? So you can influence people's attitudes. Now, there are some people that you will not persuade, and some people that will argue with you,
Absolutely.
and they will never change. And so there's no solution for them. There are other people that are kind of in the middle. They don't know. They could be convinced. They, you know, by one thing or another, they think, oh, you know, I really am concerned with my kids' future, you know, and so they will be persuaded to act, or at least not oppose.
Yeah, I think that's the key, making it personal to these people, if you can reach that.
Right.
That's one of the keys. Thank you.
Right. And let me just put in a plug here for the whole carbon tax and carbon tax and dividend sort of proposals. The point of those is if you do that effectively, then when your neighbor who pays no heed to climate change goes to Home Depot to buy their next string trimmer, lawnmower, whatever it is, they'll discover, oh, if I buy the gas powered one, it's going to cost me more than if I buy this electric one that that doesn't pollute and that runs off a grid that is increasingly powered by renewable sources. I'm going to buy that one.
That's right.
Jan, how would you suggest we address expanding population, which you haven't mentioned, and one could argue is a main cause of our climate problems?
Another great question. You don't ask me any easy questions. The only easy one you've asked me so far is the golf course question, which I couldn't answer. But so that's a very difficult question, the population question. So when I was, the first time I became aware of the population of the globe, I was in, I think, junior high, elementary school, junior high school, and I can remember the population of the Earth was 2.3 billion people, right? And now the population's, I think it's 7 billion or something, I can't remember. And it's supposed to go up to 10 billion. So the problem, so there are kind of two things to say. First thing to say is that if you're talking about energy usage per capita, if you're talking about energy use per capita, then developed countries, the United States, European Union, use 3 times as much per capita as the average Chinese, and 10 times as much per capita as the average Indian on the subcontinent, right? So that's the first thing to say. Second thing to say is that if you're trying to argue that you need to have energy parity, which is what I mentioned when I talked about the energy equity issue, then yes, population, if you're increasing population, then you have to increase the amount of energy that you need in order to satisfy that demand and that equity issue. And you're likely to blow through the carbon budget. So population so that's another thing. Population in developing countries is largely not increasing in the United States and in the European Union. I think it's relatively flat. China has been curtailed by their one-child policy. It's going up markedly in Asia, India, and in Africa as well. So that doesn't really, those are just some analysis comments. They don't really, you know, so the answer to your question is yes. And you should also take into account the energy use per capita. But yeah, it's a problem, and people don't talk about it as much as they should. So you're right about that too. On the other hand, it is what it is. And so what we have to do is to try to, with what we have as a background situation, also involving climate, is just move into a renewable energy world as fast as possible, try to leapfrog fossil fuel expansion especially in Asia, Africa, by renewable energies. Hopefully some agreement can be made about intellectual property, which is an issue. It's a problem. You're right. Other questions?
if the US does a good job on emissions, can we still be overcome by China and India, for example?
Okay, so that's another great question. Let me try answering that, first of all, just from a background standpoint. First of all, just a physics point, which is you have to understand from a physics standpoint what the problem is. Problem is that carbon dioxide gets up into the atmosphere and on the average stays there for a long time. And the carbon dioxide is the problem because it basically forms an extra blanket over the Earth's surface. And the more carbon dioxide is up there, the more blanket there is, and the hotter the planet gets. Carbon dioxide is necessary. Some amount of carbon dioxide is necessary in order to keep the planet livable, but we've just increased it way over the amount that makes it livable, and is now starting to get unlivable. So that's the, first of all, that's what the problem is. So then you have to look at, you know, what historically has happened. What historically has happened, and what historically has happened in terms of putting carbon dioxide up in the atmosphere, right? That's what I'm talking about. So what historically has happened is that the United States, and my numbers may be a little off, but the flavor is right, is the United States has contributed about 25% of all the carbon that's up there. European Union has contributed maybe another 20%. I don't know the exact numbers. China is responsible for maybe by now, maybe 15%. I don't know exactly. And the rest of the countries are responsible in various measures for the rest of it. So that's today's situation. In the future, what we're looking at, or okay, so that's the past problem. Today's problem is in terms of current emissions, is that China is the #1 emitter today, and the United States is up there. I think it's second place, and other countries are contributing as well. So that's what there is today. In the future, projections that depend on whether or not, first of all, countries comply with their nationally determined contributions, they're called, will, you know, emit various levels of carbon dioxide into the future. And so that's what I was talking about before in terms of getting to a 3.5 degree centigrade world by, you know, countries that are, you know, even if they comply with what they agreed to in Paris so far, that's why we need to ramp up our ambitions. Okay, so that's the backdrop of all of this. Numerically speaking, the United States, as I said, is responsible for about 1/4 of the emissions so far, and, you know, marginally, you know, is a large contributor now. China is marginally contributing now more than the United States, and in the past is responsible for less than the United States. In the future, the projections are, even if countries do comply with their nationally determined contributions, then the developing world will surpass in emissions the emissions of the developed countries. On a cumulative basis, which is what you know, if you want to assign responsibility, then on a cumulative basis, depending on what you think about the carbon budget and so forth, then the developing countries may get to a point where their cumulative contributions are similar to the cumulative contributions of the developed countries. Countries that probably won't actually contribute that much, even if they are increasing, are Africa, although their contributions are increasing markedly. So that's a complicated answer to your question, but that's the most accurate description that I can give you. What people tend not to do is they tend not to talk about the cumulative emissions in the past, which they should do, and they tend not to talk too much about the cumulative emissions that will occur in the future, which they should do also. They just tend to talk about what's happening now. And that provides a misleading, I would say, view of the subject. Basically, the answer, and another issue is, how much per capita are we talking about for emissions, right? So all that put together means that we all have to ramp up our ambitions. We're all in the boat. The boat is sinking. We all have to bail ourselves out. We can't have any free riding. The United States is acting. We can take the lead. We can certainly help. And everybody, all humanity has to move into a situation where we stop using fossil fuels, stop putting carbon dioxide up in the atmosphere.
John, I had a question. I know historically the United States has opposed the construction of nuclear power plants for whatever reason. And now France, correct me if I'm wrong, is almost 100% nuclear. And in that scenario, it's almost zero carbon emission. So had we gone that route similar to France, would we not be in that same scenario where our carbon emissions would have been almost next to nothing?
Another great question. Yes, you're right. France has largely, I think it's about 75% of their energy comes from nuclear power, including breeder reactors, the Phoenix and so forth, some hydropower, and some oil from their from Total. I think it's their main oil producer. So your hypothesis scenario is that if everybody had gone nuclear, would we have this problem? The answer is that we would have other problems. We could have a proliferation problem. We could have had nuclear war. So, and then how much would it have cost and so forth. So it's a complicated, if your question is, theoretically ignoring all those things, if we had a completely nuclearized power society, would we have this problem? Then for electric power, you're right. Transportation would still have been a problem because we're still using oil to run our cars, and transportation is actually, I think, the largest contributor in the United States, more than power, but so you still have a transportation problem, you still have an industrial problem, we still have an efficiency problem. So again, you guys are asking really good questions, and I'm trying to answer them the best that I can. There are no simple, I think maybe one of the things that, if I could convey this, that there are actually no one-liner responses to most of these problems. They're complicated problems. Complicated responses.
The reason I ask that is many of my colleagues who oppose this ask the question, okay, it's fine, you want to use electric cars, but that energy has to come from some source. And right now we only have the fossil until the renewables like solar and wind come up to that level. Who is, why aren't we constructing nuclear to eliminate that? There was a lot of lobbying to eliminate nuclear after I think the Russian and the Japanese disasters. So,
well, yeah, you have to power. Yeah, the transportation sector has to be electrified, and we need to have the electricity produced in a renewable way. Yes, that's exactly right. And we just have to keep plugging away and doing the best we can. Nuclear power has the problem, as I mentioned, is that it's just too expensive right now to produce light water reactors. Small modular reactors are starting to come online, but they're not, this is still not widely used, and fusion isn't ready. And fourth generation nuclear is not ready either. So it's a big problem. So you're right about what you said, and you're right to pose the problem that way. And, we have to electrify as fast as we can with renewables. I do want to mention one thing. which is a positive thing and which I think really does help. And that is that it is actually the case that this involves issues related to the grid, the electrical grid. So as you know, if you produce power, electric power, the power has to be transmitted from one place to another place using wires. And there are two types of transmission that are possible, and one is used almost entirely in the United States. It's called alternating current, AC power transmission. AC power transmission has large losses. That is to say, the electricity that you put in, after a while, you lose some of the electric power that you want to transmit. And the problem has to do with eddy currents in the wires, which we could talk about if you want. It is possible to use what are called high voltage direct current, HVDC wires, which are large diameter wires which don't work on alternating current, which don't have that problem, and which transmit electrical power in a much more efficient way. So there are proposals, and the most complete analysis has been done by Alexander McDonald, who was at NCAR and now is in a private firm. And he wrote a chapter in the encyclopedia that I edited. You can look him up, Alexander McDonald, M-A-C Donald. And he did an analysis, his group at NCAR in Colorado did an analysis, a very complete analysis showing that if you established a high voltage DC nationwide grid, then you could decarbonize the power sector by 80%, keeping the lights on everywhere for residential and commercial use, and including future demand, including electrification of the transport sector, which is what you're talking about, and hooking the HVDC network into the existing AC grid. So that's something that can be done. You run the HVDC lines, for example, alongside the interstate highway network. You can get it to all parts of the country. What you do is you take wind power in the Midwest, where it's cheap, 3 cents a kilowatt hour or so, distribute it to the rest of the country. You take solar power in the Southwest, where it's cheap, 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and in the Northeast, distribute it to all parts of the country. You need some kind of a backstop power. It could be batteries, could be some other form of power. But the sun is always shining someplace, wind is always blowing someplace, and this is a way to solve a lot of the problems that we have simply by doing something intelligent with the grid.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Ennis had mentioned early on about these leaflets you get in the mail of energy companies saying that they'll provide you green energy for if you sign up with them. And sometimes it's a higher price, sometimes it's not, maybe. But I've always wondered whether signing up for one of those just sort of earmarks something that is already being done anyway to me, without actually incentivizing or creating any new green power generation in the end. And I'm just sort of wondering whether using those alternative providers that claim to be 100% renewable is an effective way of pushing for more green energy in the whole system.
So I think the last time that I was here that people asked me 3 questions I couldn't answer. So now this is the second one I can't answer, so I don't know. But,
okay.
But I think, the more demand for renewable energy that there is, the more it'll stimulate production, I would say. But I don't actually know the answer to that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm worried is that if a given provider has a certain amount of renewable energy already in their mix, and you sign up for green energy and agree to pay more in order to do that, you may just sort of get earmarked, oh, well, from our 3% renewables, we will say we're sending all of Eric's energy from that, but it's not really, but that means that other people are getting more of the dirty stuff because they're not signed up. Yeah, and it's sort of not, it's just an accounting gimmick rather than actually an incentive to the industry.
Yeah, and with that scenario, you're right. I would say that with more demand, they'll put up more windmills.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
It's
so
a signal to the
it's going to have an
to the
effect.
it's a signal to the big business and the politicians that there's a big demand for renewable energy, and people are willing to pay even a little bit more
Mhm.
to get 100% renewable. So in that sense, if there's a mass conversion of individuals signing up, it's going to make a huge difference. That signal is going to be like a big bright light to them.
That's a good point.
All right.
Other questions?
I believe you mentioned something about wave technology or tidal technology. I heard about that many years ago, and then it seemed to just fall away, and I didn't hear anything about it since.
Right. There's a future for it in some places where there is, a lot of tidal energy. There are lots of designs. I'm not an expert, but I know that there are lots of designs, and the fact that there are many designs probably means it's immature because, there hasn't been one thing settled. So Barry, so let me just say what we're talking about here. So there are, anybody, if you've gone swimming, right, and got knocked over by a wave, you know that waves have a lot of energy, right? I personally have been knocked over by waves. And so why can't we use that wave energy to generate electricity? Well, the answer is you can. And so there are various, mechanical ways of transferring the kinetic energy of the energy of motion of waves into electrical energy. Lots of ways to do it, and lots of places you can do it too. You can do it out in the open ocean. You can do it in bays where there's a big, tidal effect. Tide comes in, then it goes out, and there are actually some facilities that do produce electrical energy, and I think actually there's one in New York that runs some restaurants that I read about once. So all of these questions boil down to, how much energy can you get for what cost? What are the maintenance problems? How often does the system break? How hard is it to hook up if you're out at sea and you're generating electricity out there, then how much does it cost to bring it into shore with, big cables and all that? So there are, people working on this. I think it's my guess would be it's a niche kind of energy source, but it's there. It could that in different isolated cases could definitely contribute.
Thank you.
And I think they are doing it in a big way in Holland because, as you know, Holland is, below the sea level. And I think they have some designs that are working effectively, if I'm correct.
Great. Didn't know that. Thank you.
Okay, well, I wanted to give you a chance to, I know you had another engagement at past, and we're rapidly coming upon it, so I want to give you a graceful exit. I really appreciate you engaging with us here, and maybe we'll do it again in another 5 years to see how progress we've made.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and again, I thank you all for listening to all this. Yes, I guess I'm preaching to the choir, but let's all get up and act.
Yeah, the choir still needs periodic motivation and further education to know how to optimize their efforts. So I've learned something here myself. So
Well, thank you.
Mhm.
So once again, thank you very much.
Okay, well, goodbye, everybody. And, you know, let's all do something about climate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Do you want hot dogs? Okay.
Thank you, Eric.